We got clear skies here and rain. Looks like the rain's coming. Well, hey there. Thanks for joining me. We're actually sitting in a 365 here. This boat, I'm just doing finishing up the generator service. We're about to service the engines. But Charles Briggs actually commented and asked where the Zerk fittings are, or the grease fittings for your engines are. So we're going to turn that into a video. I'm going to show you the grease fittings. We'll show you some things you can check on your motor. And then we'll go through the boat. Since we are in a 365 here, it's a perfect example. We'll go over all the stuff that you need to check prior to using the boat, or at least monthly, and the safety items you'd need for your boat. I could miss some things here because there's a lot to go over, but I'll give you the general gist of everything. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to comment. If you have any more suggestions of things you should check, comment below. So let's just get started. Alright, let's try to do this before the rain comes back and gets us here. It's been sprinkling on and off. So here we have a 300. This is the old school one because it has hydraulic electric steering on it. So we'll start with this one. This is going to be the most common. And I'll venture over to that one real quick. Show you where the Zerk fittings are on the new 300s because there's actually less of them. So here on our actual steering itself, you have a Zerk fitting there. And you have one on your swivel bracket. It's going to be the same thing on both sides here. And then right in the midsection here on our plate, the swivel bracket, there is one right here, which would be our starboard side. This is the old motor, like I say, so there's a Zerk fitting right there. You can grease that. I would suggest putting some grease on our rams here and around. I'm going to clean all that up and redo it because you can see the grease hardens over time, so you're going to want to redo it every once in a while. But it just helps protect that seal up there. But when it starts to get hard, it's not doing its job anymore. So clean all this off, put some more grease on it, make sure they stay greased because they make some awful noises if they rub metal to metal like this. So here's the other side here. It's the middle motor. There's one right here. There's also one in there like I was saying before. And on the very back, you have Zerk fittings right here too for your swivel bracket. That's basically it for these motors here. Alright, let's venture over here to our new Grady White. This is a new 300 with electronic steering, so the Zerks are a little bit different on this one. Same thing here, you're going to put some grease on it just like they got here. This motor's not trimmed up very far, but we'll be able to see everything. On our swivel bracket, the Zerk fitting's right in the middle there. That's for our steering. It lubes up this whole spot right here just like the other one. You'll see usually grease coming out of here, or if you look hard enough you can see grease coming out of the bottom of this yoke down here. That's how you know it's completely full. Usually it'll spit some water out of it and you'll get some grease, then you know you're good. If you look at the front of the motor here, you're going to have a Zerk fitting right here and one on that side there. And that takes care of our grease in between here because this moves and this moves, but our bracket that's on our transmitter doesn't move, so it's got to be grease inside of here to keep this O-ring nice and lubed so it can move around. We do not have any more grease fittings here. That would be for the old style steering, and I had the shaft that went through. But on these ones, we get to the other side here, you can see there's one grease fitting and there's one grease fitting here. That's for your tilt pin. So when that moves up and down, there's a pin in there and it allows it to move freely. It also attaches to your trim sender here. That's a sender for the new style motors here that moves back and forth on an arm when this trims up and down, so it knows where the motor's at. Let's venture back over here to our boat. So another thing you want to check here is pull your prop off. Get it off there with one hand. Right here is a thrust washer, and it's designed to catch fishing string right there on the inside. So you definitely want to check for string there. If you find string, you're going to want to look at your seal here. Make sure you got no oil leak in, anything like that. And then put some heavy grease back on here. Any kind of prop grease or whatever you can find is good, but we're using Vhf Penta. Works just fine. You want to grease this up first and slide your thrust washer over. That way you don't wipe all the grease off. And grease all this up real good. You put it all back together. I suggest not using your old cotter pin. They can break. See how they got cuts in them, or that's not going to fit very well anyways, because now kind of pregnant. So always change that if you can. All right, let's jump up here and take a look at a few things on this side of the engine here. So if you have hydraulic steering rams, you're going to want to make sure that you have no oil leaking down here. You see any gold or anything leaking here, that means these seals are starting to go. These seals here can be changed out. If this shaft gets pitting in it or starts to get corroded, you're pretty much just wasting your time resealing it, because it's just going to chew the seals back up. So sometimes you got to replace this whole thing if these get bad enough, but typically you can just replace these end cap seals. So it's a good idea to make sure you got no fluid leaks, got no heavy corrosion or anything. You can see a little bit here. It's not heavy corrosion, that's just a little bit of salt water. But make sure there's no pitting, and make sure your seals aren't leaking here. Next, you can take a quick visual look. Pull your cowling off here. I got the covers off. There's plastic covers that go over the top, so you can see everything, see your flywheel. The older ones are anonymous for chewing up their timing belts. There's actually a tensioner in here. Point my finger at it, you can barely see it. That has changed. That tries to, it's a little bit taper to it. It tries to keep this from riding upwards, because typically what it would do is start to ride up, and then it would chew the top of this belt. So if you have an older generation of the 4.2, I don't remember what years they were, but the first couple of years they had that issue with those. So keep an eye on this belt, and it should be changed every 1,000 hours anyways. Like you can see right here, it'll get this really heavy dust on it. See that stuff? If you see that all over the motor, then there's something going on and it starts to chew up this whole spot here. Next, you just want to take a quick visual of everything here. Make sure you got no corrosion anywhere. Our thermostats aren't leaking. They're anonymous for trying to seep around here or seep around the housing. It's a little bit different style now, but just check for salt water corrosion. Anything in here that you see salt water wise, you want to clean out. Inside the back of the cowling, there's these little holes right there, those black spots. Those are like duck bills. They allow water to drain, but they won't allow water to come back in. So you're going to want to check and make sure you got nothing clogging those up so it doesn't hold water in here. Check your seal. You can see there's salt on this seal here. It's about to get serviced anyway, so we're going to spray it all down. Another thing you should do to your engine too is spray it down. We use the Yamaha Shield here. There's Corrosion X. There's a lot of different substitutes for this, but we just use Yamaha's version. You can literally spray it anywhere on this motor. You're not going to hurt anything. It just keeps any kind of corrosion or salt or anything from trying to get into places it shouldn't. And I would do that, you know. You can visually see it on there. It's like a, well, here, I'll show you. It's almost like an armor all. So when you see it shiny, let it run, leave it alone. Then the next time you pull your cowling off, take a look, see if that stuff's still on there. It stays on for quite a long time, but you need to reapply it because it's kind of a thin oil. Another thing you're definitely going to want to do is keep an eye on your oil. This one is going to be changed, but see, it's about 3/4 of the way up between the eyes there. That's perfect. You want to check this though when the motor's cold, because all that oil is going to be driven up to the top when it's running. It'll take some time for it to all go back down into the pan here. So just make sure your motor is level, trimmed down, and hasn't been running. And you check your oil. Should be between halfway and all the way up to those 2 holes there. Alright, put the cowling on that for now. Let's jump in the boat here. Got any more questions about the motors, feel free to comment below or ask away. So definitely want to jump down here, check some things out in our bilge area. In this boat, our batteries are here. That's one thing you definitely want to keep an eye on. You can check, there's meters, there's testers, but if you're going to check them, if they're connected together, you're going to want to disconnect them. This thing's on a tray, so you can pull it out. And then there's 2 over here. These will be your house and your electronics. Also important, but the more batteries you have, the more potential you have for failure. You want to make sure that they stay charged. You know, keep an eye on them for sure. If motors start to crank slowly or you get alarms from low voltage, you definitely want to check them or replace them. I say here in Florida you only get about 3 to 5 years at the most out of them before they start to fade out or go bad in general. The weather here is not great for batteries. Plus they have a pretty hard life in a boat. You want to visually check everything. You can check your generator oil, pretty much the same thing as the engine oil. Just pull the dipstick, check between the lines. Check all of your strainers, make sure you got nothing in them. Make sure your lids are tight. Another thing you want to do is exercise your through-hull valves and make sure that these are functioning correctly, because if something happens, that's what these are there for, so you can shut them off. You don't get water coming in the boat. Your bilge pumps is another important one here. You're going to want to check and make sure your auto floats are working. So there's auto float for this one. The water's not high enough yet to activate that. There's a bunch of different auto floats. Just make sure which one you have and make sure it's activating and working. We could probably get this one to run just by holding my finger in the water here. There we go. So this one's working. You're also going to want to check, make sure your switch works for your bilge pump. This one has a secondary bilge pump here for the high water. Also makes the horn go off when that goes off. Check your drain plug here. These ones are in the center, middle of the boat, so you can access them. So if you're on a lift, you can keep this out, keep the water drained out of it if you like to. But a lot of drain plugs are on the back of the boat. It's always a good idea to check and make sure they're tight, or they're pulled if you're letting the boat sit. Put a little cover back on here. If you turn around here, you can also look, make sure your fuel lines are good. Visually, everything is good. Got no leaks, no fuel anywhere. Those should be changed every year. I suggest, if you're going to do this stuff yourself, probably every 6 months to at least pull them, dump them, and check and see if there's any water in them. There's more through-hull valves right there to exercise. Another strainer. You want to visually check your fire buoy system if you have one on the boat. There's also a thing on the dash I'll show you that shows if this is good or bad. It's connected to this sensor right here. Basically it just says it's charged or not. Alright, let's get out of the hole here. You also got a rear anchor. You want to make sure you got enough anchors for whatever you're doing. Obviously there's one in the front of this boat too. It's got a windlass. Every state is different, but you definitely want to make sure you have your life jackets, your throw cushion. That throw cushion is supposed to be 2 feet from the driver. That's the law here in Florida. I'm not sure about what state you're in or where you're at, but that's one thing that's important. I always have that close where you can chuck it overboard if you need to, if something happens. You also want to make sure you have a fire extinguisher on board. Not just the fire buoy system, but a fire extinguisher. I'm not sure you need 1 or 2, depending on the size of the boat. As they go up, you need more and more. But this one has one mounted in it. If you look right here is our fire buoy system. You get a green light. You can also override it if something happens. This will shut your generator down if that thing activates. So if you push this button, say something happens, you want to get the generator running again, you can override it right there. But that'll tell you right there if that light's on, that it's discharged. Another thing here, you get your Vhf radio. When you're running in Florida, if you have a VHF, which most people do, this should be on. That way if they want to pull you over, they can actually talk to you on the radio. I've heard some pretty funny stories of people getting chased down and they're like, I was calling you, because they didn't have their VHF on. So that's an important one to check. Obviously if your batteries are good, all your stuff's going to light up here. Visually look at all your switches, make sure that they're functioning correctly. You got to have a horn, make sure that that works. If you don't have a horn on the boat, the air horn works just fine too. You're also going to want to make sure that you have in your glove box or somewhere high and dry or in a bag or something, your registration, insurance, all that stuff, because they'll get you for that if you don't have it. Another thing here is you want to make sure that all your battery switches are functioning correctly. They should have that nice click to them. They start to get loose over time. These are known to fail on the back side. The newer ones don't seem to so much, but the old ones have a problem where they start to get loose and the back side actually will break off and then you lose everything. So make sure that these have a nice click to them, because that's how you know they're working right. It's just a ball and a spring, so every time it turns it's basically just revolving around that ball and piece of metal. So if it starts to back off, you got problems. If you got a bow thruster, you're going to want to make sure that's working. Check your battery for that, unless it's hooked to the house side. But these boats actually have their own dedicated bow thruster battery, so it doesn't shut stuff off. Always make sure you have plenty of rope and line, just in case you need to tie off anything happens there. Some other things you definitely want to bring with you is as much water as possible. I know alcohol is typically what people bring, but definitely bring water, because if you start to get sick out there, this will be a savior for sure. So for the sake of not digging through the customer's boat here, you should probably also have a toolkit. It's important to have on board just in case you need to get to something or open something up. You never know. First aid kit is always important. You never know what could happen out on the water. Flares, that's actually something that's required. Signal device flares, just like the horn. Another thing you should always be checking is your anchor light on top. Make sure that works, because you never know, you get caught in a storm, something like that. You definitely want to make sure your lights work. Nav lights up front. But basically, the more safety stuff you have, the more stuff you have on board, the better off you are in any kind of situation you might come across. Especially if you're fishing out there, or you head out 50, 100 miles. It's dangerous out there, and anything can happen, and it happens like that. I've been in different situations where I was lucky to have safety stuff or tools with me, all stuff that you should definitely have on board. Well, I'm going to get back to servicing my outboards here. Got any questions? Feel free to comment. If I missed anything, please comment. And as always, I appreciate everybody watching, and I will see you next time. Later. Well, hey there, little fella. You're not going to make it very far in this in the transom here. You need to go home. Bye-bye.